Hello and welcome to Beyond the Bio. Stay tuned this week if you ever felt any nerves or apprehension about speaking to the media. Because this week I'm talking to Guy Clapperton, who has a media training service that helps build confidence and competence for people who need to talk to the media. He and his team are experienced as media practitioners across print, web and broadcast media and help sharpen messages, reduce padding and confusion and ensure that your words are framed so that the journalist isn't tempted to edit or massage them. Guy has experience of being that journalist as he started in the trade press in 1989, going freelance in 1993 and contributing to The Guardian's technology section and others extensively. Guy has spoken internationally and done a small amount of broadcasting as well as having books published. His training operation began in 2002 when the phone went and Microsoft asked whether he offered training. And here we are over 20 years later. Let's get stuck in. So, hello, Guy, and welcome to Beyond the Bio. It is brilliant to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to be talking about all sorts of things to do with media, and I've got some brilliant questions that I want to use to pick your brain. Now, you specialise in helping people to avoid being misquoted or misrepresented. What are some of the common mistakes that people make during interviews that can lead to misrepresentation?
I can think of a couple. First of all, there is trying to cram all of your experience and all of the help you can possibly offer into a 20-minute interview slot. If you had 20 minutes with me, which is probably what you have, but I was interviewing you, then what you might find is you try to cram everything into every answer because you're trying to help me. And what you would end up with, if I weren't an experienced entrepreneur, is a very confused journalist. You're much better off zeroing it down and thinking, what exactly are they going to take away? And what exactly is the audience, if not the journalist, going to be able to remember? So you're better off with just a few things rather than trying to cram everything in. It comes from a good place, by the way. That's people trying to help. The other thing that people do is they think that they can avoid any negativity by saying no comment. Now, that's a bad idea. If you were to say to me, Guy, do you have the faintest idea what you're talking about, or are you just going to make up stuff to fill this podcast? And I said, no comment. You know what you're going to think. You're not going to think, oh, that's all right, he just doesn't want to comment on it. You're going to think I'm being defensive. So that's always a bad idea. So moving into something else is always welcome. And a third thing I would point to is the overuse of jargon. Very frequently, unless you're talking to a specialist publication, neither the journalist stroke podcaster stroke other media professional, but neither the media professional nor the audience are going to be specialists in your particular area. So keep it as simple as you possibly can. Pare away all the unnecessary bits and land something memorable rather than try to show all your expertise.
Some great tips there. And that leads on really neatly actually to my next question, which is all around how you prepare. So when you're preparing for a media interview, what are the top things that individuals should be focusing on to ensure that they're conveying that message really clearly?
There's one thing they should be focusing on, and that is the audience. Whether you're doing a media interview or whether you're doing a speech, okay, two things. First, there's the audience, and then your objective. If your objective is to get sort of mind share or something, then you can come on without being terribly specific about services you offer. If your objective is to sell a specific service, then you need to come on armed with stuff on that particular service, but aimed at that audience. For example, I've worked in the past on a publication called Microscope. That went only to computer dealers. So when I was asking people questions about computers and they told me about bits and bytes, I was a lot less interested than when they told me about the percentages dealers could make on it, how people get hold of stock, what promotions are available, that sort of thing. So everything, whether you're doing presentations or whether you're doing general media interviews or anything at all, every meeting really, it starts with the audience and you work your way backwards from there.
That makes sense. I like it. And just staying so focused on that and what those objectives are. And I think maybe when nerves set in, that's possibly when things go a little bit awry.
Yeah, nerves, I have mixed feelings about. Nerves that become, that start your adrenaline off and start you yapping about nothing are a bad thing. Nerves that paralyze you so that you can't speak are also a bad thing. However, the sort of nerves that, say, I had before doing this interview, which consisted of me thinking, I really want to deliver For this podcast, I really want to deliver for the audience. I really want to make sure I make sense. And I can't guarantee that I will always be on my best day every day without fail. That gives you an edge. The opposite to that is not confidence, it's overconfidence. So the opposite to that comes from really contempt for the audience. It's thinking, this will do. And that's never good enough. So a little bit of nerves, I think, is always quite a good idea.
I agree with that. I always feel nervous for everything, and hopefully don't give that impression when I'm actually delivering. But I think it comes from a good place in that you do want to do a good job and you want to add value.
It comes from respect for the audience, really, I think. And I know that sounds a bit pretentious, but that's what I always tell my clients when they're nervous before a speech or something. I say, great, I don't want you overconfident. I want you not on edge, but I want you to have that edge of making sure that you deliver, watching that audience and keeping in touch and making sure that you're aware of what's going on.
I think sometimes when people are worrying about an interview, particularly if it's a live one, they're worried about, those unexpected curveballs, the challenging questions. What advice do you give to the people that you work with around handling difficult or unexpected questions, especially in that live situation?
Okay, there is a specific technique called bridging, which I'll be very happy to engage with any of your listeners about any time. If they get in touch, I'll tell them about that. Yes, of course, I will try and flog them a media training session as well. However, that's just getting from A to B by using a sort of bridging phrase. And it really consists of, I can't talk about that, but here's something I can talk about. You can do it much more sort of refined way like that. The way to have, again, it's confidence. The way to have confidence in doing that is just try to bear in mind that even if you've agreed to do an interview, you're not accountable to the interviewee. You don't work for them. It's not like your boss saying, I need to know this. Now, journalists are very good at making it feel as if you do have to answer their specific questions. You have to answer to their timetable, to their schedule, and that you have to make sure it's all in journalese and quotable. Actually, you don't. It can be very advantageous if you are able to. It can be advantageous to you, but don't end up working for the journalist. It's your interview. You'll help if you possibly can. But if people start asking for something that's, say, client confidential, you're within your rights to say, I'm sorry, that's client confidential. Is there something else I can help you with?
And if it wasn't a live interview, it was something that was pre-recorded and you've said something that you didn't mean to say or that you feel could be taken out of context, what kind of rights do you have around telling them you don't want them to use something? Do you have any rights once you've committed and you've actually delivered that interview?
You don't have specific rights, and YouTube is littered with the wreckage of some interviews that have gone really, really very badly indeed. However, most journalists are actually quite considerate these days. They're aware much more nowadays than they were, say, 20 years ago of mental health issues, and very few of them will expect you to be a complete media master. So you're allowed to say, can I just rephrase that? I was recording one of my podcasts once. I do a podcast called The Near Futurist, and I talk about near future technologies. And one of the interviewees was talking about quantum computing or something. The whooshing sound was, you could hear, was this, or everything going straight over my head. But at one point she said, I'm sorry, I've gone down a complete technological rabbit hole there. Can I start that answer again? My answer was, of course you can, because A, she rescued me from having to ask her follow-up questions, which was basically would have consisted of, can I draw a fire engine or something? And it got her out of trouble. And above all, the simpler answer served my listeners better. So just ask. If you're aware it's going wrong, just ask.
And if someone feels that they have been misquoted or misrepresented once something has gone live, what steps should they take to correct that narrative?
There are two ways to handle that, really. First of all, there is the question of whether you use an external public relations company or if you have internal communications professionals. External comms companies are superb. They will be able to pick up the phone on your behalf. You will feel involved. You might feel threatened. You might think, I've just said something that could damage my company, which if you own it, you're going to feel terribly threatened by that. If you don't own it, then you're going to feel your job is under threat. That puts you under pressure. That means you're the worst person to be handling that particular scenario. So what you need to do is to get on the phone to your PR company and say, I think I've screwed up. And this is what we need to do. Your PR company is then most likely to say, well, here's what we're actually going to do. They'll know who to talk to. They'll know a constructive approach with the editor. Editors and journalists are really not there just to trash people. If they think someone has done something really silly, they're likely to take it out. Decades ago, there was an IBM executive who managed to come out with something about a new product of theirs. The journalist said, "Is this actually any good?" And the executive said, "Oh, yeah, it's like cocaine. You just have a little bit and you want more and more and more." The call went in from the PR person, who was probably by that stage in an embryo position under the table wanting their mother. But the call went in and said, "Look, you're just going to lose this guy's job. We're not going to dispute that he said it. Of course, I was there. He said it. I'll witness that. I'll stand up in court and say he said it. But you're only going to ruin his job and jeopardize his family." So they waited a few days, because in those days you had to wait a few days. And the quote came out in the paper. It's just like ice cream. You have a little bit and you want more and more. It was a lame quote. Nobody cares, but nobody wants to trash somebody just for the sake of it. If he'd said it was rubbish, that would have been a different scenario. And it was, by the way.
That's a great example. That's a great example. So in these types of potentially crisis situations, that's great if someone has access to an external agency that could handle that, or maybe someone internally. What about someone that's listening that might be a one-man band, or they're just setting up and they don't have that expertise in-house? What could individuals do in that scenario to maintain control?
Sure. So this scenario, it's gone out, so the damaging stuff is out there, yeah? So I think what you have to do, first of all, things are much easier to correct now than they were 30 years ago, because, of course, everything's online, so you can actually edit in real time. Always, no matter how badly you think the media professional has screwed up, always start off with a little email that says something like, "I'm sorry if I wasn't clear," or, something that hints, "This is my fault," no matter what you actually think, because you don't get the journalist in defensive mode, whatever you do. So, "I'm sure we don't want to mislead the listeners. I'm sure we don't want to mislead the readers. Could I just ask that we amend whatever it is?" You're likely to get a positive response, because if you're any good at your being quoted, or if you're any good at coming out with quotes, they're likely to want to come back to you again. Sometimes it will be harmless. Sometimes it may be artificially complimentary. I did a little interview with somebody a while ago similar to this, and they introduced me. They did the intro after the recording had taken place, and they introduced me as award-winning journalist Guy Clapperton, which was very interesting. So I did a little blog entry with a picture of me holding up my 10-yard swimming certificate from when I was 7 years old, which is about the last, yes, it was yards when I was 7 years old, which is when I had got my last award. But so, you can, but that was a harmless thing. So I didn't bother them with that. If they'd said something completely wildly inaccurately, like, I don't know, editor of the Times or something, which is so, remote from the actual truth, then I would have had to have made an amendment there.
That's quite funny. Did they come back to you? Did they see the picture?
We're still mates. I think it's one of those, "Oh, whoops, oh, sorry. Would have sworn you got an award." No.
Yeah, that's funny. So I guess still on the same theme there, with the media often distilling statements into these little snappy sound bites for things like social media, etc. How can interviewees ensure that their message isn't oversimplified or taken out of context? Because that's the danger, isn't it, with these short clips?
It kind of is, although taken out of context is so often used by people when what they actually mean is, "I screwed this up completely and I was hoping that they would just guess what was actually going on in my brain." The context is quite likely to be a company that's been around for about 20 years, and the journalist will not be able to get the whole context of that, no matter how much research they do, unless they've been following it for 20 years. So I'm always a little suspicious of the phrase taken out of context. The thing to do is, in your preparation, try and work out a few sound bites that the journalist could actually use. If you were doing a speech, if you're doing a presentation, if you're doing a keynote, the chances are you'd have a few of those up your sleeve, because you'd really rather like people to put them out on social media from the audience. I've actually been in the auditoriums where I've heard people saying something, and then the quote flashes up on the screen and it says, "Please retweet," which, if you've ever had a whole audience thinking, "Nah," that's a bit blatant. But if you can prepare a few of those things, those little phrases, I have a few when I do my media training. I've come out with one of them today already, which is, "You don't work for us," us being the media. I always try to hammer that home, and people do take it away. And when I'm talking about sound bites, I always try to come up with, "Make it memorable." Bit of alliteration in there too, over there. Never make it sound too artificial. And always, if you're going to do a sound bite, try and make sure you believe in it. I don't want to get political, but I'm sure we all remember Theresa May's 2017 election bid when she kept saying strong and stable all over the place. Later on, after that, she admitted she didn't really believe in it. She thought it was ridiculous. And if you look back at her interviews, you can tell she just sort of has strong and stable, looking very morose, as if to say, I don't want to do this, strong and stable. Whereas if you compare it to, again, not to get political, but a few years later, Boris Johnson, I don't think he could order breakfast without sounding enthusiastic. Whatever you think of the person, he was able to deliver those sound bites. So it's a matter of not being artificial, being authentic.
And that can be the challenge sometimes, this authenticity piece, which is a word that gets bandied about a lot, but getting that balance between being authentic but also being quite strategic when you're engaging with the media.
People always say that, but honestly, you are probably authentically you and being strategic at the same time when you're at work the whole time. It's just that you're articulating it and you think, oh, I've got to sound a bit like me. How do I do that? Just speak. That's how it works. It's that there really isn't such a trick. I once did a session with a guy who was 25 years old and he had done some really great things. His company was worth something like $6 million or something. And he actually said to me, well, nobody wants to hear from a 25-year-old who's done all this because you sound like a smart aleck. He did not say smart aleck. I said, what sort of personality should I use? And I'm thinking, what sort of personality should I? Your own personality. You're not going to be able to fake anything else. You're not a qualified actor. You couldn't take the pay cut. So, just go ahead and be authentic, but don't overthink it. I think people really get hung up on this idea of authenticity when actually just being yourself and being strategic, it's probably what you do at work all the time anyway.
Yeah, very wise words for sure. How important would you say body language and tone of voice is when you're speaking to the media? And have you got any tips around that?
Yeah, again, there's authenticity, and I think self-consciousness is probably the worst enemy, particularly if you're just starting. If you're concerned about what to do with your hands and you're on camera, it may well be that you could tell the camera operator or get your PR person to tell the camera operator that a tight shot, just including your shoulders and your head, will enable you to tell a better story than just having these inert hands. Or if you're used to using your hands an awful lot and you're aware of it, I mean, many people are not aware of these things at all, but just tell the camera operator you might want to get the whole torso in because I'll be doing a demented windmill impression anyway. So you might as well liven up the shot and then leave it to the professionals. Voice, I think it's almost always a good idea to slow down, he says, consciously slowing down because I'm getting quite into this. So it's always a good idea to slow down. It gives you thinking time. It gives the listener time to absorb what you're actually saying. And if you're in a second language, it's an extremely good idea. And try not to sound like Smashy and Nicey, the DJs, if you happen to remember the Harry Enfield sketch, but also try not to sound as if you're just reading a shopping list. So it's just be yourself. Overthinking is the enemy.
Yeah, it so is in so many things, isn't it? And that's when
That was another soundbite, by the way. Did you spot that soundbite? Overthinking is the enemy. You see what I did there? Yeah.
I did. I think that's really good. It's powerful, it's clear, and it's meaningful. But it's true though, isn't it? And I think a lot of the time we do all overthink things, and that's where you get tied up and you kind of you lose it a bit. And it was interesting hearing you talk about slowing your voice down, because I find that when I record the take action version of this show. So, the main version comes out on the Monday and the take action on the Thursday, which is just a short reflection on the Monday show and a take action to go and do something with it. And I don't tend to prepare for those take actions. I'm just kind of thinking out loud almost. And I do slow down and I can feel the change in my voice. And I often think, do I sound like I'm making it up as I go along? Maybe. But actually, it's clear in terms of that communication piece, and it helps me to think about what I want to say. So, yeah, it's interesting being aware of that. Whereas when I'm in scenarios where perhaps I'm nervous or if I've just met someone at an event or something, I can talk really, really fast and then everything just gets a bit lost.
But then you've got the whole body language thing going on. You're talking straight to them. You're talking to one person. You're not trying to. Doing a podcast is an unusual thing. It's a lot like doing a radio show, except that you'll quite possibly be in your own studios. I suspect you are, or your own spare room, as I am now, and you're effectively doing something that's a bit more like what they call a fireside chat at a conference, so called because you're not really chatting and there's no fireside. But you're still trying to address this whole group of people. So yes, you do have to slow it down. People will absorb things at different paces. People will be interested in different bits of what you say. So you've got all that even unconsciously, you've got all that going on in your head. Whereas if you're talking to one person, their body language will tell you whether you're going too quickly. You might not even be aware that their body language is. They certainly won't be doing it deliberately, but you'll be able to pick up on those little signals, like running away to pretend they're going to get a cup of tea.
Bringing things into 2024, we've talked about a lot of trends and things that have happened over the years. How have you seen the relationship between the media and public figures evolve in the era of social media, and what new challenges has that brought?
Years ago, it was the case where you could always back yourself up with facts. You could always fall back on research. There was always the sanity check available to you. In politics, since about, well, let's call it 2010, because it started after that, you could have people saying that refugees are eating people's pets, as Donald Trump did recently, and they fact-checked him on it, and he still insisted it was true because he'd seen it on television somewhere. You can have all sorts of people claiming that various bits of scientific research are simply not true or whatever, and they have no facts or evidence to back themselves up. But because social media amplifies it so much, it's still there. This is nothing new, by the way. People pretend that, or no, people kid themselves. I shouldn't say pretend. People kid themselves that this is something brand new since social media. Any of us who've read conspiracy theories on the moon landings or on who killed Kennedy, whatever, since 1963, this is not due to social media. It has been amplified and accelerated because more people could do it and read a wider audience much more quickly. So I think those things are a worry, and it means that you have to have your proof points. It means if you're going to claim anything is the case, you do need to have some evidence in front of you and be prepared that there will be somebody who will evidence-free shoot it down. And also particularly at the moment, the emotional side of things is coming in. I don't believe I have any logical insight to offer on the Middle East conflict at the moment, except that it's horrific and I wish it would stop, which is not very helpful because everybody thinks that. There could be people on either side thinking, what, you're not condemning them or you're not condemning them? And I don't have the knowledge or the in-depth knowledge to do so either way. I just think it's horrific. And there will be people who will be willing to criticize me for that because I'm trying to be objective rather than emotional. So I think it's being aware of those pitfalls is important.
Very true. I have loved our conversation. We're out of time, and I've enjoyed immensely picking your brain and asking you some of the questions that have been on my mind around this topic. If someone is listening and they are feeling really nervous about doing radio or TV or whatever, but they know it's something that they need to do to progress their business or their career, what are the advantages of working with somebody like you and getting some media training?
Well, first of all, practicing and doing so in a safe space in front of an experienced journalist, so that you can do your screw ups, if you like, in a safe place rather than in front of however many millions of listeners and viewers you're talking to. I think that there is no substitute for sitting in front of actual camera lights, which my friend and colleague Paul will help with, and getting sort of feedback from people who have been there, done the interviews themselves, and watched them broadcast or written them up afterwards. And that is what we offer.
Awesome. That sounds really useful. I'm sure lots of people will find that useful because there seems to be so many more opportunities to get on various different things these days. So always good to be prepared, and that is certainly going to help with those nerves. If someone is listening and they're wanting to make contact with you, how is the best way for them to do so?
Just drop me an email, guy@Clapperton, with two P's, CLAPPERTON.co.uk, and I will come running.
Awesome. We will pop that email address in the show notes as well, alongside your LinkedIn profile. Is that the best platform for you?
That would be perfect.
Awesome. Well, we'll pop that in the show notes as well so that people can connect with you. Thank you so much for being on Beyond the Bio, Guy.
Well, thank you. It's been a great opportunity. I've loved every second.
Thank you for listening. If you're serious about growing your profile, take our free profile assessment quiz to see where you're at right now and get hints and tips on how to improve your score. You'll find the link to the quiz in the show notes. If you've enjoyed the episode, it would be mint if you'd subscribe, like, and leave a review. See you next Monday.